Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I am super excited about this particular one. 10 years ago, when I left classroom teaching in London to set up what has now become Learning Ladders, one of the main motivations was to try and find a way to help schools interact more positively and more productively with parents, with a perspective that obviously parents are incredibly important in their children's education and forming the values that they have about learning. And I was super fortunate to be introduced to Jenny, our guest today, at a COBIS conference in London a couple of weeks ago by a mutual friend, Jane from Cambridge Education. So thank you, Jane. And we had an immediate sort of spark of conversation. Jenny did the keynote at the conference. There was a huge appetite in the room, and I managed to persuade her to give us half an hour of her time to continue the conversation today. So, Jenny, thank you very, very much for giving up your time. I know you're super busy and have rushed here and have to rush somewhere else afterwards. So I appreciate that.
Very
Let's
happy
jump
to be
straight
here.
in.
I was so excited to hear what you were doing when you told me about it. I immediately recognized it as a massive hole in the market and thrilled to hear that you're filling it.
Good. All right. Well, we can pick that up later. Maybe let's jump straight in then. I've said we'll try and do a speedy webinar and sort of focus on a sort of half-hour quick burst. Let's jump straight in. Maybe for the benefit of the audience, perhaps just tell us who you are, the mission you're on, and why particularly school leaders should be listening to you, as I know they are, because I've seen it firsthand.
Sure. So I've been a journalist for 25 years. I actually covered finance for a long time, and then I switched to education, which was something I had always wanted to do. And then when I had my kids, absolutely knew I wanted to do it, and was really frustrated at the state of kind of education coverage. And so really tried to rethink how we talk to parents about their kids learning, first through journalism and then through the book, which was I teamed up with Rebecca Winthrop, who is the head of the Center for Universal Education at Brookings. And we really wanted to write a book that helped parents understand, decipher, translate learning, which is largely visible, very hard. We haven't been in classrooms for a long time. Understand their learning, and then really offer some practical, tactical strategies to help them support kids in their learning where they are. And we identify four modes, four different ways kids show up for learning. And then we kind of say, here are things you can do that are, by the way, backed by evidence and actually have some sort of heft around them to support their learning. And the obvious, what school leaders will know and understand fundamentally, but often don't have time to do, is that when parents and schools and teachers have trust and are on the same page and are rowing in the same direction, outcomes for kids are more than twice as good. So there is a reason to do it. It's just very hard for school leaders because there's a long list, including teachers and students, who should and do come first. And so parents often sit at the bottom, but that trust and engagement and understanding is really important. And so where we were trying to fill a hole was to say, hey, learning's complicated. You haven't been 8 or 10 or 15 for a long time. Here's a lot of what's going on in teenagers or young people's minds. Here's why they're making some of the decisions that might seem very irrational to you. And here are actually ways that you can try to get behind them, support them, and get them unstuck when they get stuck in learning. And what we noticed is a lot of kids get very stuck in learning for reasons that aren't always just directly related to where they are in their curriculum.
Yeah, no, and that I think will resonate with a lot of people. And you talked about the different modes of engagement and that sort of stuff in the book, which we'll touch on, I'm sure, and I'll sort of let people read the book. And you've done loads of other podcasts about that, so I'm going to try and focus on a slightly different perspective to stuff you've talked about, and people can access through the website, which we'll share later. But just picking on that, so most of the schools that we work with are sort of international independent schools following a predominantly British American curriculum all around the world. And they'll have students right the way from sort of 3 years old, right the way through to sort of end of school at 18. Do you see any, I mean, in the research and the conversations that you've had since, because obviously you've been talking about it a lot at conferences, do you see any particular characteristics of the sort of international school sector that are really interesting or relevant to this conversation?
Well, I think in the international schools, you always have the third culture element, which I think is probably, it's not something we address in the book, but I've actually written quite a bit about. And so I think there's just an added layer of complexity of navigating what is a very exciting world, by the way. What a gift to be able to give your kids sort of an international education and to be part of multiple cultures. But in this moment in time, that is also can be very disorienting. So I would argue that sort of disengagement is kind of a global problem. And I think so it does also apply in international schools. I think we haven't talked about the modes, but my guess is in my reading of the people I've talked to, achiever mode, which is kind of the kids aiming for the gold stars and everything put in front of them, is one of the most significant challenges they have. So these are these are the kids who are often at risk of burnout and really kind of mental health challenges, in part because these are very competitive environments in good ways, right? Offering a ton of opportunities for what we would call developing explore muscles, which is wonderful. So how do you do that in a healthy and balanced way versus a way where you're trying to do everything at once? So I think the added layer of complexity is that third culture is in a way the sort of paradox of choice, so many opportunities, sort of picking the right mix of them. And often, and this is sensitive, but I'm going to go there because it's 100% true. I think it's um, often very, very busy parents, busy professional parents. This is my household. So I say this from a place of love and understanding. Um, but I think it's sometimes really hard with big jobs to carve out the time to sort of be with your kids in the meaningful moments that we need. And so what we need is kind of better language and better conversations with our kids in the moments that we do have together, because everybody is very busy right now, and it can be for different reasons. But, you know, for example, my husband and I travel a lot, which I imagine will be quite similar for a lot of families in international schools. And so I think there can be more of an incentive and maybe more of a need to connect to your kids and to connect to them around their learning, and to be able to have kind of healthy, non-judgmental, curious conversations about their learning and about their feelings with their learning and about the third culture layer and about finding friendships that communicate to kids that you are both there sort of as an emotional support, but also can help them navigate some of the learning support they may or may not need, right? That could be if you're overscheduled, rescheduling things or finding some way to take your foot off the accelerator. For a lot of kids, it's going to be the opposite, like really helping them get into gear, because a lot of kids just sort of get overwhelmed and they check out. And then they're in this, what we call passenger mode, coasting along, doing the bare minimum because they're terrified to try because they know they're going to fail. They feel they're going to fail. And so, again, it's that conversation. So those are a couple components that I would think would be relevant to the international community.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in terms of the achiever mode, maybe worth touching on that just to sort of explain the four different modes. But I mean, certainly reading the book, I think the achiever mode is something that you recognize a lot in these schools. Very high achieving children, you know, they're on the front and center of the website, lots and lots of information about that. And certainly we see, and I know people in the mental health sphere see a lot of these children at some stage during their school journey will sort of hit a point where it's too much and they explode and it all comes crashing down for them. So maybe just quickly, if you don't mind, just to sort of touch on those different modes of engagement that we talk about, and just in case anyone hasn't read the book, because I'm assuming they have, but in case anyone hasn't.
I'm going to assume they haven't, but they should. They absolutely should, but I'm going to assume they haven't. So the four modes, and again, these are dynamic. These are not labels. These are not ways of pigeonholing kids. This is not another way to like say your kid is X. These are not nouns. These are verbs. They're dynamic modes, and kids show up in them based on how they feel and the environment they're in and their capacity within them. And you just said it actually perfectly. The reason we developed them is because they do get stuck, and we want to help them get unstuck, and we're trying to get to them before they blow up. That is like really the number one point. So there's passenger. These are the kids who are coasting along, doing the bare minimum. They race through things. They will show up at school. They often get decent grades because they can kind of get by, but they are not actually engaged in learning. So they are showing up, but not actually learning. Even though sometimes grades will reflect, at least early on, that they're okay. It typically catches up with them, and that's the challenge. They haven't developed those sort of resilience. It's often because they are above or below their ZPD, their zone of proximal development, or the kind of sweet spot of learning. And so those are some conversations we can have about passenger mode. Resistor mode is exactly like it sounds like. These are the kids who are withdrawing. They are acting out. Everybody knows them. They're dubbed the problem children. We argue they're children with problems. We really have to get under the belly and figure out what is going on with these kids, because there is always a reason. If they are fighting school tooth and nail, there is a reason, and it can be really tricky to get to because kids don't have the vocabulary and they to sort of express this. But the good news about kids in resistor mode, and they're very hard to parent and they're very hard to teach, is that these kids actually have a lot of agency. So when they get their agency turned toward learning and not away from learning, they can really flourish and thrive. So that's resistor. Achiever mode is what we talked about. These are the kids aiming to get a gold star in everything put in front of them. Everybody loves them. Teachers love them. Parents love them. Everybody gives them positive reinforcement. This is amazing. You're getting the straight A's. You're doing all the things. You're going to get into a great college. It feels all good. Oftentimes kids in this mode, these kids are at the highest risk of mental health challenges of all the others. They're very fragile learners often. They learn to not take any risks with their learning, and they often really, when they face failures, they crumble because they haven't been given opportunities to take risks, and they've assigned their worth to their achievements completely. And so that's where the risk comes in. A lot of people think that's the pinnacle of the engagement mountain. It's actually explore mode, is what we talk about as the pinnacle. And this is what kids are going to need in an age of AI, which is, this is kind of where curiosity meets drive, and they know what they're interested in. They're willing to advocate for their interests and tie their learning, bring what they're learning in a classroom into the things that they care about. It's this concept of agentic learning, agentic engagement, I'm sorry, agentic engagement. And that is really where we want to help kids. Our research showed that less than 4% of kids in secondary school get the opportunity to be in explorer mode in school. They often feel that they're sort of automatons in a system that is, here are all the things you do, and they're like, here's the hoop. Everyone's just trying to get through the hoop and try to get the A through the hoop, and oftentimes not developing the capacity to say, which hoop do I want to go through? I know I have to get through a lot of hoops. That's the point of school. But what do I love? What am I good at? What are my strengths? What are my interests? Like, that is what's going to help build the explore mode.
And in terms of, that's super useful, thank you. So in terms of then for a school leader, I'm a school leader, and I get it. I buy into what you're saying. It makes sense. But I have a local inspection regime, which is all over me. My fees are tied to my inspection outcome. I have a board I have to report to. I have parents who are paying fees. I need to get through. I hear so often that parents drop their children off as young children and want to pick them up 10 years later as a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. And that's kind of, the challenge for these sort of school leaders.
Yeah.
Obviously, how do we balance? I know you talked in the book and you've talked about on other podcasts and stuff, this sort of balancing this sort of systemic challenge that you have to get through this, that's something that's there, with introducing that flexibility at all ages as well. So again, a lot of our schools will be concerned at the younger children as well, not just the teenagers. And we sort of see the same sort of challenges. I know the focus of the book is teenagers, but it's very relevant for primary age children and younger children as well. So have you come across some really good models that people are doing with that?
We have, but I guess what I would just say conceptually, which I hope would apply to everyone, is that, like everything, there's a spectrum, right? There's kind of a continuum of things you can do to develop explore mode in a school setting, right? And so the work of John Marshall Reed, which we relied on a lot, is very much around the classroom. And that is honestly any classroom anywhere. John Marshall Reed's research has been done in 14 countries, ranging from Peru to South Korea. So very hierarchical, very knowledge-based curriculums, to the US, which is like way more laissez-faire. So in every single one of these contexts, he found that this autonomy supportive teaching helps kids perform better, feel better, like they have better pro-social outcomes, they have better mental health outcomes, and they have better academic outcomes. So the number one message is training teachers to give kids more autonomy in a classroom. And this does not mean changing your curriculum. It does not mean sort of giving up on standards. It does not mean choose your own adventure education. It means invitational language in the classroom. It means a different way of discussing things. It means giving kids some choice in how they do the assignments that they have to do to get to the content they need to get to. So it means, you want to do your homework, I'm going to give you two ways, 3 ways. You get to choose. That active decision making is developing agency in kids, and it's helping them to care about what they're doing. And that's what we want. We want to combine the thing they have to do with the drive to actually want to do it. So, the sort of base level, classroom level, every teacher, there's sort of 7 core practices to this autonomy supportive teaching. Every teacher can do this. So I think that's sort of at one level. I think then there's a lot you can do with timetabling. And I think a lot of international schools are quite creative with this, putting sports at the start of the day. So you're kind of getting people's bodies moving, and building in some free time, some choice time. Some EPQ is, like, in my mind, a really brilliant example of a way that you scaffold independence, choice, and agency and learning, right? So finding ways that give kids the ability to choose what they're doing, really dig in, but have a teacher there scaffolding the experience, because that's where you're developing the agency. So I think it's so again, we're starting with the classroom, then you kind of have the timetable, which is, a bear for everybody. I get it. There's so much in there. But I would really argue that in a age where we're thinking so much about which literacies do we, digital literacy, media literacy, AI literacy, like all of these things, base level, if you want kids to be motivated, you have to develop their motivation. And this is kind of, you're literally dealing with like ground zero of getting kids to care, to dig into whatever you then put in front of them. So I think it's worth whatever is going to have to be taken out of the timetable, because something will be. And I think it's communicating with parents that free time, that unstructured time, that some sort of reflection period is really important. Metacognition, I know a lot of North Anglia schools, for example, is one group of schools that are doing a lot of work with this, but this idea of really embedding, reflecting on learning, strategizing about learning, thinking about learning patterns and learning strategies, that is incredibly powerful. And then there's obviously just whole school redesign. I mean, I think there are schools that are doing things like tying learning in the classroom to the real world in such a way that kids love. They do not feel that school is relevant or preparing them for the world that is coming. They told us that overwhelmingly. So any opportunity we have, especially with kids as they get older, I don't think it's as important when they're in primary school, but when you get to sort of the upper levels of high school, and it's, you know, everything matters, right? So there's the high stakes exams. There are, you know, if you're in a US type system, it's the GPA, like there are all of these markers. And so where are you finding opportunities to tie stuff that's happening to the real world so the kids feel that they are actually doing stuff that will matter and prepare them? There's this deep unease about, I am being asked to exert my energy to do work that is not going to make me better prepared for university or the world behind it. And I don't actually always believe that that's true, but I don't think we do a good enough job. I think we are teaching a lot of great things. I think we haven't done as good a job of connecting it. And, you know, international schools have a great opportunity to do that. So bringing more professionals in, sending kids out, it's complicated and it's time consuming, often takes a person to do. But I was listening to a school in Saudi Arabia that has literally worked with employers to basically build out the person in the company that is going to manage sort of large scale arrivals of kids for work experience. And so you say to industry, you know, you can do it through an apprentice levy, you can do it through policy, but you say create space for students to come in and learn, see things, learn things, do things, make a contribution, and then when they get back to school, reflect on that. If you do that once a term or once a semester, you know, all the way through middle and high school, think of the data kids have to work with about who I am and what I care about. And yes, that will take away from some classroom time, but it could pay off in spades in terms of the spillover effects. They now have a why. Why do I want to do math? Well, because I need math for this incredibly important job. So those are sort of some of the things I would identify.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think when you're in a through school, you see different phases, don't you? So I mean, obviously, you know, my prior life teaching early years is very much, you know, you'll lay out various activities and you'll have the curriculum framework that you'll then observe children and see how they interact with it, and you'll be able to make your thing. So you've got that curriculum overview, but it's very sort of initiated by the children. And that agency gradually seems to sort of disappear as they get older. I mean, certainly when I was primary, you know, the ability to sort of say to children, right, okay, you know, your project this week is tell me what you did over the holiday. That can be an essay, a video, you can do a slow motion, whatever, you can do an animation, you can build something, whatever it is, that's fine. You get away with that a little bit more as they're sort of younger, and it feels like maybe curriculum pressures, exam pressures start to, you know, manipulate that. We've got
Can we just pause on that? That's like, to me, that is, so our data show that in sort of primary school, elementary school, 75% of kids love school. And by 10th grade or year 11, that's 25% of kids. Loving school is not a proxy for engagement, but it's very close. Like if you were losing 3/4 of kids, right, by 10th grade, it is pushing a boulder up a mountain to get them to do a lot of the content. So if we can find a way to not be pushing a boulder up a mountain, and I think you just nailed it. In elementary school, we care about the whole kid, and we're developing choice, and we're developing group time, and we're developing sort of, you know, all these skills that we want kids to have in the real world. And then we get to secondary school, and we somehow think that doesn't, it matters even more. Like, the brain development suggests that it matters even more. The sort of stage of life argues that it matters. We kind of just missed the boat on that. I really do think we do so many things right in primary school that we then kind of lose the plot on in secondary school. And again, it is all these standards, and there's a lot of forces we can't control, but everything we can do to control that in that setting, to do exactly what you're talking about. I mean, projects are obviously projects, challenges, you know, that's the kind of stuff that will get kids excited, and that getting them excited while still having standards, while still having, you know, that really is the secret sauce.
I mean, I think in some days, you know, I'm a former primary teacher and early years teacher, so I'm going to get sort of shouted at by my secondary colleagues watching this and stuff. But I suppose inherently in the structure, do you feel like sometimes primary colleagues, we have a bit of an advantage as much as we spend all our time with the children, we teach all the subjects, so we really get to know them. So I can have 30 kids in front of me. One of my favorite quotes from the book, I've written it down, it's something like here. it's really hard for teachers to get a wildly variable group of kids through one curriculum to arrive at the same endpoint at the same time, defying all logic about human ability and motivation. I love that so much. I wrote it down. That's from the book. And that's kind of how it feels like as a teacher, doesn't it? You know, you've got these wildly different humans that you want to try and get to a similar endpoint. And in primary, you can really get to know them, you know, so you can know that, okay, Jenny's really passionate about this. If I want to get her to do this, I can do that. Maybe do you see ways that schools are beginning to try and understand the humans in front of them a bit deeper than just being 30 individuals I need to load up with knowledge to be able to get through an exam? Or is that work still to be done?
I think we know it. I don't think we're doing anything about it. And I think there's a lot of infrastructure that makes it really hard. So I really don't blame teachers for this at all. I very much blame policymakers. I mean, I'll just give a very tangible example. I have a daughter going through GCSEs right now, and I do not know a structure that is better designed to destroy a love of learning in every child. Every one of her friends that I talk to, how's it going? How are you getting on? Like these, think of all the knowledge you're consolidating. I try to take a positive spin on it, and they're like, it's so boring. Like
Yeah.
26 exams over a month and a half after a year of mocks, consolidating 3 years of content with one high stakes exam. Literally, you couldn't, in my opinion, design a worse system to foster a love of learning. I love rigor. I am not anti-rigor, and I am not anti-knowledge. I just don't think if your only means of communicating to them that the important way of demonstrating your mastery of this is on one exam on one day, and that will be the reflection of your effort and your coursework and everything for 2 years. It is such a bizarre message to communicate to a brain that is trying to find meaning in the world, because what they will assign their meaning to is their grade on their GCSE. And so that will cause some kids to, really push themselves to unhealthy limits to get that number. It will cause a lot of kids to check out because they don't feel that they can succeed. It will cause a lot of kids to check out because they are struggling to succeed. It is not a system that, has some variability. So I don't blame teachers, if they're going to honor the kids in a system like that, should help kids prepare for GCSEs. I get that. But the problem is kids are bored to tears, literally bored to tears. And so
Yeah.
I
No, I
really
mean,
think
certainly
we
that's
need,
that.
as governments need to be, there's a piece in the Guardian today, and I really think the drumbeat is getting louder. We need to care more about just the content. We need to care more about the experience of kids' days and lives and what it feels like. And that is not coddling. It is not, snowflake, whatever. It is literally understanding neurobiological imperative of adolescence and then designing for it. That is my view.
Yeah, no, I agree. In terms of practical strategies for school leaders and stuff, and teachers and stuff that they can do, I think younger down the sort of age range, people are probably maybe more confident and more flexible to do this. I'm thinking I had a great conversation with a school leader recently at the COBIS conference we were at, funnily enough, and something that we've looked at trying to help in terms of system supporting software and stuff that we do is what they've started to do, and it's a baby step, but it seems to be working really well for them. It's really simple, and I'd be interested to get your take on it. So they at the beginning of every academic year for every subject, they sit down with the new cohort and they say to them quite honestly, look, this is the curriculum structure we have to get you through during this academic year. These are the sort of key goals, key skills, key knowledge that you need to know, but we want to make it relevant to you. So how are we going to do that? Let's have a conversation about it together. What interests you? Which bits do we need to cut out? Which things do we need to include that we haven't thought about? What's going to sort of keep us all motivated and sane through the next 12 months or 9 months of this learning journey? And then they refocus the curriculum. So it's still aligned to the national curriculum standards. They still do the exams, they still do the rigor, they still do the assessments, they still do the reporting. But there's that subtle refocus each year. And I was really drawn to that as a really simple and effective sort of model for how you can do it.
I think it sounds brilliant. It also sounds to me, my guess is, and I'd love to talk to this school, my guess is what you get is a bunch of buy-in. They will feel very agentic. I think there has to be a follow-through. So if kids suggest, they're going to suggest some pretty wacky things. And so you're going to have to say no to
Yeah.
some, but you're going to also have to say yes to some, or the whole enterprise is just tokenistic. And so I think it's what's actually happening in that space. Like, it sounds great. What I would want to know is, are the kids coming up with good ideas? My guess is they are. Like, kids are really good. Like, if you give them a chance to rise to the occasion and a say in how they're going to do it. My guess is they're going to come up. I mean, again, they will come up with some
Yeah, they will.
horrible ideas as well, and that is fine. I really love that. I know another school that does a very similar thing. They don't give as much say to kids, but they're very honest with them that this is kind of where we need to go. And then they say, we're going to do some amazing, really cool things. And then for the last 2 months, we're going to buckle down. And I'm going to teach you, we are going to basically do exam strategy, but I'm
Yeah.
going to teach you the principles in fun and interesting ways. And then 2 months, we're doing pure exam strategy, or one, it's a full term. So I guess it's the it would be, you know, in the UK system, it would be the probably the winter term before, right? You're just going to do exam strategy, but that's manageable. If you know that you're getting 5, you know, 4 terms of fun and interesting and 2 terms of, one is exam prep and one is actually taking the exams, that's way more doable than what I have watched kids go through with basically 3 years. In independent schools, I think there's almost 3 years of exam prep now. And it is mocks and more practice papers and more practice papers. And again, don't blame teachers. I think they are honestly trying to do the best they can. But I think there's some really interesting software being developed that is taking curriculum standards and developing interesting projects and helping to do that connection work, which is really, really hard work, and teachers have no time. So I would love to see whoever that school is and whoever that person is come out and talk really honestly about what they're doing, because I bet that practice would spread like wildfire. Because what if, again, it depends what's happening, whether it's working. My guess is you're going to get more engagement, you're going to get more motivation. And I don't think exam results will suffer, but you know, that's obviously to be determined, and you do have to follow the data a little bit.
You do. And I mean, it's interesting. We commissioned some research. So we've been around for about 10 years. And originally it was just a kind of intuitive, this feels like a good way forward for me. I think we talked about this at the conference. You know, I was a teacher in a primary school in London, and it was pretty obvious that getting parents to support the children was going to improve their attitude to learning. It was going to sort of, you know, improve their actual physical ability and mental ability to do the learning I wanted to do. So that's why Learning Ladder sort of came into existence and stuff with the tutorials that we do for parents, because the barrier we were trying to sort of solve was this idea that parents probably want to be involved, but actually a lot of the conversation between home and school is literally about the learning. It's about a specific learning objective that I'm doing this week, and I need to understand this, and I have an assignment or I have homework related to it, and parents, I need you to help with that. And a parent may or may not know how to do that. So if we can upskill parents, you know, the primary curriculum in particular, if you break it down into bite-sized chunks, most adults can be upskilled to support a child at primary with that particular chunk in the moment. They don't need to be trained to be a teacher. We can do that. So that's what we do. And the research we commissioned, we looked at that logic model. Does the research back that up? Intuitively, we've arrived at a product that's popular, and that's great. And it was really interesting. I'd never heard of it before. They were talking about collective teacher efficacy and stuff, and the relationships between teachers, relationships between students, and this idea that a learning goal structure rather than an outcomes-based structure is far more effective, ironically, at getting better outcomes when you're focused on the learning and trying to get it done rather than the grade. So this sort of mess that we seem to have got into when you get towards exams, that you're almost doing question level analysis and saying, oh, if you could just get another 10% on this question, you'll get an A. The love of learning is lost. Whereas, you know, in sort of primary, we're able to maybe do that a bit different. I just want to touch on, because we've only got a few minutes left before I know you need to go, that sort of concept of homeschool partnerships is always a thorny one. So there'll always be some people who are really nervous about that in schools. You know, the phrase that we always used to use is, you know, certainly as a teacher, you want to engage with parents. Intuitively, it feels like a good thing to do. You want to have that partnership, but there's a feeling like you potentially open the doors, and there'll be some parents you can't crowbar out again, and they're probably not necessarily the ones that need to support their children. And there are other children, there are other parents, you know, you can give away ice cream on a hot day and they still won't come in. There's all sorts of barriers around that. So in terms of how schools approach that and how they do that, we've obviously focused very much on the academic side of things. So these are the learning goals. That's your primary focus in some ways. This is how we can share that with parents, and we can make that accessible. We can include that conversation. You can use some tech to do some funny things, do some cool things. What other stuff should schools really be doing in terms of really thinking about that day-to-day engagement for homeschool? That's just something I'd like to sort of focus on for the final bit.
Yeah, so I can think of sort of three things. I do think that there are tech products that can help with that, and that sounds very counterintuitive, because it's a fundamentally human relationship. But I think part of it is sort of the mechanisms through which we're communicating, right? And tech, we all have it, and it's all available. And so there's just really wonderful research from a guy named Peter Berger and a lot of other people around sort of some of the most effective things we can do is sort of send targeted text messages to parents at opportune moments to help their kids. So, maybe with if some state, tests are coming up, and that's maybe the worst example. But anyways, sort of, read with your kid. Spend some time talking about your kid's favorite book. Ask them to summarize the plot line. Talk about character development. Like those little questions spaced at the right time, not too much cognitive overload for the parent, but I think text is has been shown at this point to be a really powerful way to get messages to parents in the right moment. So I would say there are companies that do this. I don't know if Learning Letters does that or not, but I think
I should put our hand up. We do that notifications thing too. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's really effective. So I think another is a broad invitation to families to participate in something that has absolutely nothing to do with learning. So Surrey Square School, which is a school I really admire here in the UK, one of the things they do is, a sort of a dinner series. So, maybe once a term you have a dinner put on, and it's a bit of a potluck, right? So these are not families with huge amount of sort of spare cash, but everybody makes a dish, everybody comes in. There doesn't have to be talking about learning outcomes. It is really about building trust and relationships. So if there are ways to do that that are both recognizing the, again, strengths and assets of a community, right? A lot of parents will feel very intimidated. Maybe they don't speak English. I mean, this isn't, but there's this kind of way of building community. So I just love the idea, and you can put some student agency in that one. So I was talking to someone recently, actually at Cobus, about he invites families in for a supper, and the year 10s cook the meal and the year 7s serve the meal, and they
Right.
have to plan the whole thing. So that project is very powerful to plan a meal, to put it on. And what he does, what he supports is, call it 50 to 100 pounds worth of decoration, so that the space feels less like the cafeteria, which doesn't always, or the canteen, it doesn't feel great. A couple plants, some nice balloons or banners, a covering on the table, and some flowers on, what a difference that makes to the space, and some music. You do those things, or you get some kids to play music. So I think that's like the broad invitation, the tech. And then I would say, just on the teacher level, catch them being good.
Yeah.
Honestly, most parents hear from teachers when things go
Mm.
wrong. And I think you build a lot of trust by recognizing, and I do think teachers are very good at this, but the compliment sandwich always, it can be dicey. So if there's a way, either through tech or through, AI can be very, very helpful with this, right? First drafts of letters on something good your kid did. Um, that is so powerful to get that recognition. The other day, a teacher said to me, I've really noticed your daughter's tennis has come along. And then I said to my daughter, hey, your teacher said your tennis, and she was beaming. And I wrote back to the teacher and I said, hey, I think it'd be really powerful if you mentioned that to her, because she didn't seem to think that that had happened. And then 2 days later, my daughter came home and said, oh my God, my teacher said that my tennis has gotten much. She was so excited. This is a 14-year-old kid. This isn't even like a young kid. We want to be recognized being, contributing things, and if that happens in learning, great. If it happens in other areas, fantastic, right? Being a good friend, being a supportive community member, helping out with the tidying up of the classroom, all of those things, it gives parents a conversation point. So when you get that nice note, it gives the parents a way to say, hey, like, you did something really good. We're all, catch them when they're good is a phrase that we use with toddlers. It is like 100% needed with adolescents as well, because I find myself, I have two teenagers, there's a lot of like nagging and no that goes along with sort of adolescence. And so any chance to be yes and good and wow, wow,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
want.
Totally.
Teachers can support parents in that, and then parents are then supporting the learning process. So it's this really beautiful cycle of having something to talk about that isn't just a test, that isn't just a learning standard, that isn't just a learning outcome, but that will feed into all of those things.
And isn't just a sort of reward star or something. I mean, you touched on at the beginning. It's interesting. You said, this conversations about learning. That's actually our strap line. Our sort of marketing strap line is creating conversations about learning. And part of that is exactly that. I think it's that specific nature of your child has done well in this, which gives you the insight to have a conversation rather than necessarily. Sometimes I think it can be kids come home. I've got younger children, sort of, in much lower down in primary, and they'll come home with a sticker or an online reward chart, and you'll be like, oh, great, well done. What did you do? I have no idea. I don't know what it is. So that breaks down. But then when you can actually say, oh, you did really well in this, in the way that you're describing, that is meaningful. So I would be interesting in terms of my experience of the way these things work in schools as a parent, as a teacher, as a sort of governor and stuff, is you have to go all in. I think if you're going to do it, you know, it's worth making that extra 10% of effort to be really specific about what you're praising the child for, so that the parent can follow that up, rather than just a merit sticker, which gets kind of lost and a lot of the time they don't do. So that's sort of interesting.
And it also gives teachers some agency. I mean, it's a worthwhile exercise for a teacher to sort of say, what, clearly you have your academic goals that you have to have for a classroom, but what are my, what are my other goals? And then how am I going to reward that throughout the year, or recognize that? And then communicating that, like, I am going to be looking for active kindness in this classroom. And when I see it, I'm going to reward you, and I'm going to tell your parents, and again, not to make it so much, but then, or curiosity, curiosity is something I want to build this term, and curiosity is a muscle, and we're going to be looking for ways to develop this muscle. And so I am looking for questions that are relevant and on topic, but also maybe a little bit, different. So anyways, I just think, like, decide what it is you're trying to develop, of course, with respect to the curriculum, but beyond that. And then, as you say, look for specific examples, reward those examples, and use it to create a norm of that thing, of kindness, of curiosity, of generosity, whatever the thing is you're trying to build. And I just think we're finally recognizing these things all work really intimately together. This is not, you're a nice kid and that's separate from you're a kid who learns a lot. Those two things have a really powerful relationship with another. So I think there's like a magic there. And you said, do I see it happening? I don't see it happening enough, but I do think we know way more. And so I'm excited for the opportunity to do more.
Okay. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to sort of wrap up because I know that you're super busy and stuff. I have pages and pages of questions and notes here, and we only touched on a bit of it. And I will send you through some of the research that these guys did for us. It's really fascinating, talking about collective efficacy and engagement and stuff. I'll send that through to you, and I'll try and connect you with the school, and we'll follow that up. If the people that are watching this and stuff, particularly international schools and stuff, want to get hold of you, you've obviously got the website and stuff, but are you available for bookings and talks in exotic locations around the world if somebody wants to get you to come in and do insets and that sort of stuff?
Absolutely. I'd love to. I do a ton of virtual work. And I also, I travel very, very extensively. So yes, you can find me at Jenny Anderson Writes on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. Search for Jenny Anderson, New York Times. That's where I used to work. And there's a lot of Jenny Andersons out there. And then, of course, the book is thedisengagedteen.com. And you can reach out to us through that as well. So there's multiple ways to get in touch with me, and or just ask you for my email. There you go.
Brilliant. All right. And we'll put the links on that at the bottom of some tech person will do something cool with the webinar recording afterwards and put the links in it so people can get it.
We talked
Thank you.
Just to say one other thing, we talked to what we've often found is a book club with parents at the beginning of the year is a very powerful way to set families up. So sort of we're going to read this book, and then we're going to have a conversation with me about it. And then it's sort of 30 minutes of talking about the book, and then 30 minutes of question and answer. And parents feel really, really empowered by that, because it gets them thinking about, it's almost like it's like a learning outcome. It gets them thinking about, oh, I can support my kids learning, and then having a conversation about it. So it reinforces the learning.
Excellent work. Okay, that sounds excellent. Thank you. Listen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We will share that obviously with everybody afterwards. It was really good to see you again. I wish you every success with all the stuff that you're doing, and obviously Rebecca as well. And yeah, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.